Everyone, I'm Morgan Hefner, and we are going to be presenting on Saudi Arabia.
Hi everyone, I am Katie Jude.
I'm Sporthy Candleye.
I'm Lily Kazee.
And I'm Sagar Patel.
So first, we're going to look at the GDP and the GDP per capita. This is measured in U.S. dollars. So for Saudi Arabia, the GDP is $1,100.15 billion, and the GDP per capita is 30,436 U.S. dollars. So Saudi Arabia has a relatively high GDP, and there's only 10 countries ahead of them, so they're ranked 11th, which I found a little shocking when doing some research. Some of these countries that fall ahead of them are the United States, Japan, and Germany. And looking at the incline on the next slide, we can see that they've had a pretty steady incline from 2010 to 2024. With this also counts in the exception of 2020 because the economy did fall slightly in 2020.
Next, we're going to look at the gross national product as of 2022. The GNP was $1,004.43 billion, and the GNP per capita was $27,590. This is a 16.83% increase from 2021, which is a considerably steep incline because in the years prior to 2022, the year-to-year percent change was less than 10%. This is likely due to a bouncing back from the 2020 recession. And the difference between GDP and GNP was $103.72 billion, and the difference between the GDP and GNP per capita was $2,826. And this shows that Saudi Arabia makes much more from their domestic production than from their foreign production because the GNP encapsulates money made from firms that are Saudi Arabian, and that includes firms outside of Saudi Arabia, whereas the GDP encapsulates money made within Saudi Arabia's borders. And here we can see in the graphic that the GNP is higher than it's been in a very long time, possibly ever, and it looks like it is going to continue growing from here.
So like many Middle Eastern countries, Saudi Arabia is rich in natural resources, more specifically crude oil. In fact, it's ranked one of the highest, possessing around 17% of the world's proven petroleum reserves. It's an important part of the country's economy since there's a correlation between successful oil trades and the GDP. Saudi Arabia also has a huge deposit of natural gases, mainly as a byproduct of the crude oil. The natural gases are also a huge contributing factor to the country's energy wealth, and it's also a safer substitute for oil since it's much safer and cleaner. And Saudi Arabia also has a great amount of minerals, such as iron ore, gold, copper, and phosphate. For the production and exports, considering the high reserves that they have of crude oil, it's no surprise that one of the biggest exported goods of Saudi Arabia is oil. Even though the country first started oil production less than 100 years ago, it now accounts for around 10% of the world's oil production. And then although Saudi Arabia exports a large portion of the crude oil to many countries, they themselves also use a ton of it, mainly for petrochemicals such as plastics and fertilizers. And those are mainly used for domestic use. They also invest in production and construction materials such as cement and steel, as well as aluminum. And these are both for trade and domestic use. As for the imports and consumption, as a result of specializing in petroleum and petrochemicals, and dealing with like the natural minerals that they have, Saudi Arabia focuses more on importing things that they don't have much of and aren't like an expert in. Things such as broadcasting equipment. They had a large amount of that for some reason, and also other electric and industrial machinery. They also import cars and daily necessities such as consumer goods and pharmaceuticals, and foodstuffs like rice and wheat, mainly because of their harsh agricultural environment. And then trade and currency. The currency used in Saudi Arabia is known as the Saudi Rial. It's often abbreviated as SAR or SR. And then as of the 27th, $1 is equivalent to 3.75 Saudi Rial. And then their main trade partners are the United States, and then Asian countries like China, Japan, South Korea, and India. And then also many countries in the European Union as well.
So for recent trends in inflation, according to Saudi Arabia's General Authority for Statistics, the inflation rate in February 2024, so last month, is 1.8%. This is a slow inch up from January, which is 1.6%, and it is the highest since August of 2023. In the past 10 years, the inflation rate has fluctuated up and down between 1% and 3%. And the average of the last 10 years is 1.8%. This is a relatively mild number, especially compared to other countries, and this is likely due to government interference with like subsidies and things like that, and like price caps. This is other than the major spike of deflation from 2017 through 2019, which is correlated with a major drop in food and beverage prices, which is likely due to the lift of the ban on meats and poultry imported from certain countries. That was by the SFDA, which is like Food and Drug Administration, but for Saudi Arabia. There was also a major spike in inflation from June 2020 to August of 2021, and this is likely due to a sales tax that increased. It started in 2018, and it was a standard 5% for all goods, and then it increased to 15% in the middle of 2020 to counter the effects of COVID-19. So looking at this graph, we can see the major dip in 2019 or 2017 to 2019, like the deflation that they had, where it's below 0%, and then the really quick spike in July 2020 to August of 2021. And then this is the change each year. So you can see that it remains pretty steady with really small changes in inflation, whether it goes up or down per year. But then you can see that in 2020 and 2021, there were obviously really huge spikes. Next, we have the trends in unemployment. The unemployment rate as of quarter 3, 2023, which is the latest one that is on the General Authority for Statistics in Saudi Arabia, is 5.1% for the entire country, but 8.6% for like Saudi people themselves in the country. It has remained relatively constant between 5.5 and 6% over the last 10 years, but the labor force participation rate has increased among women and decreased among men. There was a really big spike in unemployment, probably due to the COVID-19 pandemic, and it reached 9%, which is the country's all-time high. Here we can see the relatively stable rate of unemployment between 5.5% and 6%. And then in 2020, we can see where it very quickly spiked up to 9%, and then slowly it's been coming down since then. And recently it's been like around 5.1 up to 5.3. This is the rate of change over those 10 years. So like I said earlier, like you can see that the change between years is also quite low. Like it's below like 0.5. It's like near 0.1 to 0.2 each year. And then in 2020, obviously there was a like 3% increase. Next, we have the economic structure and characteristics. So Saudi Arabia is one of the world's largest producers and exporters of oil, like we said before. They do have pretty strong government control over economic activity. Their government is an absolute monarchy, but they are incentivizing the private sector through credit institutions, the Saudi Industrial Development Fund, and reduction in public service fees and utility fees. And they also have a modern banking system, which includes like 13 commercial banks, retail and corporate banking, investment services, credit cards, ATMs, etc. So pretty modern things that we have like in the United States and other countries.
So recently, there have been many important and interesting developments in the Saudi economy. Perhaps one of the biggest of these is Saudi Vision 2030, which in simple terms is a plan to diversify the economy away from just the energy sector by the year 2030. This is, of course, because in the Saudi economy, oil accounts for a very large percentage of their real GDP and an even larger percentage of their fiscal revenue, which has made decreasing the nation's dependence on oil a priority for decades. It's built around three main themes, which the first of which being the vibrance of society, which entails emphasizing things like culture and entertainment, the development of tourist and cultural locations, such as things like UNESCO World Heritage Sites or the development of sports leagues. The second pillar is to develop a thriving economy, which includes increasing international competition and foreign direct investments, as well as exports aside from oil. And the final pillar is to be seen as an ambitious nation with a strong government, a high household income, and a higher percentage of non-oil revenues. A particular aspect of this plan that has garnered a lot of attention in the media are the presence of giga projects. These projects are very large, high budget operations that are designed to stimulate the Saudi economy. One of the biggest of these is the New Enterprise Operation Model, also known as NEOM. This will be part of a new urban area that'll cover over 10,000 square miles along the northern part of the Red Sea. Part of this will include the Line, which is a futuristic linear smart city, which I have pictured over here on the left, or yeah, sorry, the right, apologies. And this project is going to cost about $500 billion. Similarly, the Red Sea project is a project that's going to emphasize tourism and serve as a tourism hub, also in the Red Sea. It will include over 50 hotels and 1,000 residential properties, both of which will have the result of creating jobs and stimulating non-energy sectors. Vision 2030 has already seen some success. As you can see on the graph to the left, Saudi Arabia has decreased its percentage of its GDP, revenue, and exports that come from the energy sector substantially since 2016. So that means that they've already seen a lot of success with this initiative. Some other things to touch on are how COVID has impacted the Saudi economy. As we've already touched on, of course, COVID did have a negative impact around the world and on Saudi Arabia as well, with the presence of lockdowns around the globe. The demand for oil was at a low and prices obviously fell. This only served to further underscore and emphasize the importance of initiatives like Vision 2030 and the diversification of the Saudi economy. They were able to economically recover in a rather efficient manner, though, in part due to pre-existing initiatives to help digitize their nation and their government and help to create a more sustainable and diverse economy. And this also helped to further foster innovation across different sectors. But overall, the outlook for Saudi Arabia is very positive, with them experiencing their greatest economic growth rate of all time in 2022, and with the World Bank predicting a steady growth of over 4% over the next 2 years.
Looking ahead into the Saudi Arabian economy, the GDP is predicted to continue growing. This is due to their changes in oil production and their changes around the distribution of their money. Due to Vision 2030, the inflation rate is predicted to rise from 1.8% to 2% by 2025, with a small dip predicted around June. There is going to be less dependence on the oil-based economy because of the Vision 2030 project. They're planning on doing this by growing the economy in other areas, such as privatizing state-owned assets and changes in the wealth fund, and developing other industries than the oil sector to continue to grow their economy. And there are also plans to lower the unemployment rate. They're planning on doing this by increasing the rate of women in the workforce, as was mentioned earlier, because the rate of women in the workforce in Saudi Arabia currently is only 35%. In this graphic here, we can see up top that the GDP is predicted to keep growing. Now, this is a forecast, and that doesn't necessarily mean that it is 100% accurate, because you cannot account for natural events and things like that. And then down here on the bottom, we have the predicted inflation rate, which again is simply a forecast. This goes up until 2027. And we can see that right now we are about right here, and it is predicted to continue dropping. However, again, this is only a forecast because there are other factors that cannot be controlled that could step in. And these are our sources. Thank you guys for watching, and thank you for being here. And that is our presentation.